Hello everyone, my name is Greg Baron. I'm going to present you something about photogrammetry. This is something I love and I spent a few years trying to research it. So I earned my first money in game dev in 2003, so it's about 17 years really since I joined commercially. I made a few games. And this presentation is going to cover things I would be happy to know before I started. So if I would know all those things, it would make my journey much more easier. So it's going to be made from 4 parts. The first one is going to be introduction to photogrammetry and materials. And the second one is going to cover photogrammetry equipment. The third one is about my workflow. And the last one is what I'm planning to do next, and Q&A. So what is the best way to create photorealistic PBR material, in my opinion? So there's many ways to create good PBR materials. Some are faster, some are slower. Some works better for one type of surface and totally don't for the other one. We have 3 main approaches. First one is a manual, traditional texture creation. So it's about painting, modeling, sculpting the texture manually. The second one is a procedural approach. So it's about substance designer. And the last one is capturing the reality. And it's copying what already exists and turning it into PBR texture or material. Each approach has pros and cons. So with manual approach, there's no limit, so we can do whatever we want to. The art style is totally unlimited. We don't need any special gear. Unfortunately, it's very skill dependent. So when we've got 2 artists and one is super pro and the other one is a junior, there's going to be a huge gap between the textures they made. So it's also very time consuming because it needs from the texture artist to spend a lot of time and effort to create super cool texture. And the workflow is very destructive because we are painting. And because there's that huge difference between artists and it affects the quality, keeping the consistency between material is super hard with this approach. And in result, it's very expensive technique if we compare it to the quality we get. The next approach is a procedural one. Again, we've got unlimited art style, so we can create whatever we want to. It has non-destructive workflow, which is super good. Still, imagination is the limit, so we can do whatever we want. We don't really need special gear to create anything. The cost is average in this case. So it's also very skill dependent, not as much as traditional approach, but yeah, there's a difference if the material is made by super pro artist and someone who's starting. And it's time consuming, so to create photorealistic material using procedural approach, we need to spend a lot of time and effort to make it. And keeping consistency is still a challenge. So there's a lot of feedback usually needed to keep super high quality level. And the last one is a capture. And this one is super fast compared to the previous approaches. The workflow is quite easy to follow. It's very cheap when we compare the cost and the quality we can get. It's super easy to maintain material consistency because we are copying from the reality and reality is already consistent. And unfortunately, we've got very limited style because we are limited to the reality. The workflow is destructive if we'll use just this technique, and the gear is pretty expensive, and we are limited to the reality. So which of those is the best one? So in my opinion, there is no the best or the only way to create materials, and we should take all the pros from each approach and leave cons away. And this is the reason why it is good to know all those techniques, to be able to pick the right one for the right job. So let's proceed with a fast example I made. I captured the rock using photogrammetry, and this way I bring the ingredient of reality into digital form. I baked it down as a height map, so it was pretty straightforward process. And after that I grabbed the ZBrush and I sculpted the shape. It took me like 20 seconds. And I used that height map as a stamp. So it's not a perfect texture, but it was made really, really fast. After that, I went into substance source. I picked the first random material from Daniel Tiger, and I took his graph. I removed the tough part he made, and I simply put that thing I did in ZBrush in a few seconds, and you can see it's pretty good quality. So if I would spend 5 or 10 minutes, it would be super cool compared. So this way we get super fast approach, very cheap material compared to the quality we get. We still get consistency and very high quality. It's average with skill dependency. We are still limited to the reality, but we can push it a bit forward because we are sculpting something. And the workflow is non-destructive in this way. So it was just an example. So we can mix those techniques really in many ways, and I would say that only sky is the limit in this approach. We can check the quality of existing material by judging them. So when we look on the material, we can see, does it look photorealistic or is it something fake about the material? So it's just about us. Like someone is painting photorealistic character, we can easily say, is it photorealistic or is something wrong with this one? So I made a test and I picked few materials from ArtStation, and you need to help me to judge, are they real, are they scan-based, or are they fake? So do you feel it's a fake one? So as a subject, I picked the toughest material to make, in my opinion, it's a grass material. So I was trying to make something like this in Substance, and it's super hard. I was also trying to scan it, and it's also super hard to scan. So this is the first material. What do you think? Is it fake or is it real?
Fake, but it still looks pretty good.
Yeah, this is material made by Daniel. He spent 15 hours on this one. It's a fake material, procedural. Let's pick another one. Fake or real?
That's a scan.
Fake. So that one was made by Josh, and it took him 5 nights to make this one. How about this one? Fake or real? Scan? No. This one was made by Kyle, and it's procedural. He said it took him 1 day to make this one. But those people are really masters in Substance. So these are top industry people. How about this one? Is it scan or is it fake? No. It's made by Daniel, and it took him 6 days to make this one. How about this one? Yeah, also it's Substance. It was done by a student, but this one really impressed me. I thought it's a scan, it's not. Took him 12 hours, so pretty impressive. How about this one?
You're failing at that.
It's a scan. So this is scan made by Dice. It's my friend, and he's just learning how to scan, and he was able to achieve that level of quality in 12 hours of processing the data, and just 1.5 hours of actual work. How about this one?
It's a scan.
Scan or fake?
Scan.
Yeah, this is scan made by myself, and it took me 20 minutes to capture it. I took 110 images. It took me 6 hours for reconstruction in photogrammetry, so it's a process I need to just wait when it's done. 30 minutes to bake it down into PBR textures, and 15 minutes for seam removal and tweaking. So in result, I really needed 1 day to make this one, but it was just 1 hour of actual work to bring that level of quality. Of course, I give it the data just to impress you. It's not true, because really when we are scanning, we need proper weather, we need to go somewhere, we need to pick location, so we need to meet certain weather and lighting conditions. So it's not as simple. Yeah, we can organize those things, so everything can be faster, and we can capture more surfaces during the same trip. So we can go somewhere, capture even 100 surfaces. We can use better equipment than I do, so it might speed up the process, and we can even consider getting a team of people going somewhere and capturing everything we need, entire biomes, and bring it as a data and proceed in a more efficient way. So the result is always still the same. It's super high quality, so we just need a bit of practice to make it. Why is it so hard to achieve photorealistic level of quality? Because every existing surface has a lot of details on every level. So as a material artist, we need to bring all those levels into materials, otherwise they always feel a bit fake. So even if those details are seen as shades or shadow details, we still need to bring them. And I think that's why Algorithmic introduced grunge maps, because these are not really procedural things. I think they are based on images. So this is that ingredient of reality we need to bring to make something real. Otherwise, it always feels fake. So to create photorealistic material, we need to utilize all tools we've got or we know, and all techniques, and never get trapped using just one. There is many ways to capture things, and I would like to present you 3 main techniques. I think they're super useful. So first approach to create material is 2D photography. This is how I call it. The second one is a Photometric Stereo technique. And the last one is Photogrammetry, my favorite one. About the 2D photography. So this is technique which helps us to create photorealistic material using just one single image. So we are taking one image and we are using software like CrazyBump, Photoshop, Bitmap to Material, Artomatics or Alchemist. And we are simply pressing the button and we've got the PBR material. The problem is that single image it doesn't contain enough data for full 3D accurate reconstruction. So it's always kind of fake, and this is an example. I captured a piece of grass using my monopod and a camera. This is the image I took. I processed that image using Artomatics, and I received, in a few seconds, pretty nice texture. But this approach is unpredictable, and it works only for really simple types of surfaces. So, for example, when we've got white rock on the ground, that software usually thinks that rock is higher than something which is darker, and it's very glitchy. So that approach it's super fast, it's very easy to learn, it doesn't need any sophisticated equipment, it's very cheap, it's super simple, but it's very glitchy and unpredictable. It lacks PBR consistency because of being unpredictable, and it gives us always pretty random results. And it's PBR inaccurate, usually in details. The photometric stereo technique, that one is a bit more sophisticated. And in this technique, we estimate surface normals by observing the object under different shadow conditions. So it works pretty much, I think it was based on how normal map was built. So we are taking shots of the same surface and we are changing the source of light. We are just moving source of light around. And if we take a look on a normal map, as everyone knows, it's a set of 3 grayscale maps. It's not a purple map. So one set, which is stored in red channel, show us how shadows behaves when the surface has light source on one side. The next one is from the top to the bottom, and the third one is from the top down. And if we combine them together, we are getting the normal map. And this technique is using that philosophy. So to go with this one, we need to capture 4 to 8 images by moving the source light around and process it with special node in Substance, for example. And it's super fast, and this way we are getting super accurate normal map with high level of details. The problem with this technique is that it's not consistent. So in this example, I took the shot with light being pretty low and being higher, and you can see how much it affects the normal map. And there is one guy who, in my opinion, is the best photometric stereo artist in the world. He's a tech director in Toronto. It's Dave. He built his own scanner, and he made even better version. And he's experimenting with scanning things using this technique. So if you have any questions, feel free to ping him on link. And he gets awesome results. And this is his last design. Feels like nuclear weapon a bit. So he made it. It has light sources which are very consistent inside, and it always gives consistent results. So this technique is super fast. It's very easy to learn when we've got equipment. It's pretty cheap. It's very simple and predictable, and it's PBR accurate. We've got high quality results using it. Unfortunately, we need special equipment to get consistent results like that one made by Dave. And this is the biggest downside of this technique. It has very limited coverage. So it means we can recreate surface as long as we've got consistent level of lighting. And usually lighting has its fall off. So it means we are losing data when it's starting to fall off. So really, we are limited to 20 centimeters maybe, maximum using this technique. And this technique is fully dependent on lighting conditions. That's why that nuclear weapon is closed. How about photogrammetry? So the word photogrammetry was made using 3 Greek words: light, drawing, and measuring. And in simple words, this is the way to reconstruct 3D data using 2D images. It's nothing new. It has been used in many industries, and it was patented over 100 years ago in 1893. And it's been used already in forensics, in mapping cartography, in archaeology, as a tool to measure high-risk locations, in reverse engineering, and in 3D modeling, and many, many others. And this is the way to capture super accurate one-to-one from the reality and turn it into digital data. And recently we have found that it might be also useful to scan surfaces and turn them into materials. And this is something I was researching recently. So we are just scanning the surface and turning it into PBR material. It's so simple. We've got 3 steps for photogrammetry. First step, the most important one, in my opinion, is a 2D capture. So it's capturing the surface. The next one is photogrammetry itself, it's reconstructing. And the last one is turning it into PBR data. I was experimenting with different type of softwares. So I was experimenting with different type of gears for capturing, and I was experimenting with different type of software to process images I took, and different reconstruction software, different 3D software to create low-poly models for baking, different bakers, and different software to turn results into PBR material. And at the end, I defined the workflow which works the best for myself, and this is that workflow. So the first part is a capture, the next one is image pre-production. In photo editing software, I picked Photolab because it's cheaper to Lightroom probably. The next one is Metashape. We've got also reality capture, but again, Metashape is cheaper, and it's almost the same quality software as reality capture. With reality capture, we're having subscription, so it's more expensive in long term. For low poly creation, I use ZBrush, and I bake in Substance Designer because I have found this is the fastest baker nowadays. And I use AI to remove seams and tweak logic of the material. So I do it with Artomatics software. And I'm using Designer to process final tweaks for everything. So as I mentioned, the most important part of the capture, of the process is the capture. It's because this is the part which cannot be repeated. If we'll capture something, it's done, and we cannot go back and reshoot few more images because lighting conditions are going to change in time. So to make a good capture, we need proper equipment. And this is the next part of the presentation, the gear. So I collected the gear I use. The first piece of this gear is a camera, and to capture, we can use mobile to capture reality, but there's a certain level of quality we cannot get using mobile. And really we need to use DSLR camera. And this camera needs at least 18 megapixel matrix, manual setting, and possibility to save images in RAW without any post-processing. I use Canon 80D, but it can be any DSLR camera. And I like this one because it has adjustable screen, so when I'm shooting the ground surface, I can still see it. Also, I equip it with fast lock mechanism. The next thing I use is a lens, which is very, very important. It needs decent light values, aspherical glass to avoid distortions in perspective, and it needs that focal length. Usually I shoot with 35, but this is length used in photogrammetry, so 24, 35, 50 millimeters. I use Canon zoom lens. Some people think that it's better to use fixed lens. I don't agree with that because this lens gives me much more opportunities to capture things around. And this lens has 18 to 135 focal length, so it means I can zoom pretty much everything. And it has aperture 3.5, but I never use anything lower than 8. And it has image stabilization. And when you've got a zoom lens, you shouldn't shoot with edge values because usually zoom lenses are made this way that if you are setting the lens to the edge value, it has a lot of distortions on perspective. So it should be avoided if possible. Also, I would suggest to use remote because when you release the shutter, it shakes the camera, and even if it's a micro shake, we are losing a few pixels. I would suggest to use tripods and monopods to stabilize the camera. I love the tripod with folded arm. It helps me to put camera perpendicular to the ground. I also suggest to use the ruler. I love that one to the right, because when we are shooting images, we know the scale, but after images are done and reconstruction is over, we have no idea how huge this surface was. So I would suggest to use rulers every time as a scale reference. Also, we can use polarization filters, which doesn't work alone. So they can be used only with cross-polarization, and this is how they work. So polarization filters really removed certain type of reflections under certain angles. So for example, LCD screen has 45-degree light angle. So by rotating the filter, we just trim that angle under that light under that angle, and it can be useful to remove reflections. And one more piece of equipment is a light reflector. It's something to cast our own shadows, and it's pretty mobile. It's a magic to fold it back. It took me 1 week to learn. Also, we can build our own tent, use an umbrella, or even override the light, and I'm going to present it at the end of the presentation. The next piece of equipment is a color checker. It's another reference. We definitely need it, and it gives us information what colors we really have on the image. Without this thing, we have no idea what colors we have. We can just guess. I'm using X-ray color checker. It has 2 pages. One is with color clips. The other one is with the gray card, which is used to set the white balance with the camera. It has 2 years of expiring date, so it means that company which made it guarantees that those values has correct just for 2 years. After, it's not accurate anymore. There are a few rules I recommend while shooting things. So it's because albedo has to be very flat in PBR materials, I would avoid shooting direct shadows if possible. So when we're having a sunny day, I would shoot in things hidden in the shadows. Also, I would cast our own shadow. In this case, I made a mistake because it should face the shooting side with the black side. I used the golden one, so I'm bouncing the light and I'm adding color, which I shouldn't. But after that, I shoot the color checker with the same golden side, and I recalibrated it using it. But it should be facing with the black side. We shouldn't shoot anything which is reflective. It's possible, but it's not recommended. So, for example, to shoot something like glass, we need to cover it with matte substance. And this way we can get this prop reconstructed. Or we can use cross-polarization. But to make cross-polarization working, we have to remove all additional sources of light. Because, as I said, we can cut just one angle light at a time. So this is an example how cross-polarization works. So as you can see, what we see is a reflection. So for example, when we've got those tools, the metal tools, we don't see the color because color of metal is black. What we see are just reflections. The very important thing is, while we are capturing things, is that we are capturing the data. We are not taking beautiful shots. So we should capture the reality as close as possible and set up camera the way we can capture the more data. So it means we should really use the most informative file format while capturing. So this is RAW. We shouldn't shoot JPGs if possible. So to compare, 8-bit, which is JPG format, can contain 16 million colors. To combine 12 bits can handle 68 billion, and 14 bits 4 trillion colors. So that's the difference. And while we are shooting RAW, we have a lot of data to trim after and tweak. If we will shoot JPG, we have nothing to trim and we are losing data. So this file format is considered as a lossless. This is how we see things. So the way we see things, it's not how they look like really. It's a set of different things put together. This is how our eyes see. So in simple words, the universe is a noise. These are particles which are vibrating with a different speed, and this is everything around us. And our eyes reads that vibration under certain wavelength and turns it into color. And we see just small amount of possible vibrations. There's a lot of vibrations we cannot see. So to compare, this is the same spectrum we see compared to the same spectrum seen by, the same vibration seen by a dog. So this is the image we can see, and this is the same image seen by dog with the same spectrum. This is how we see birds and how birds see themselves. And this is how we see the world and camera with auto setting to the left side. And this is how the world looks like in reality. So the world is brown, really, very, very brown. And that's why we are setting the auto white balance. White balance helps us to remove additional lighting factors like sky, which adds blue lighting. And if we shoot the white balance card, we know that it should have RGB around 200. So when we shoot this value and we see it's blue, we need to shift colors to make it white again. And with those colors, we are shifting other colors. So this is how white balance works. Also, the data can be processed by using this clip from the color checker after the capture is over. About the focal length. Focal length really is the distance between point of convergence and the sensor, and it's given in millimeters in camera. And the wider frame gives us more overlapping for reconstruction later, less images per capture, so capture is faster. We need less exposure time because we let more light to go to the sensor, but we are losing details per frame and we are getting bigger distortion. So it means it's better to, every time we need to pick the right focal length for the capture and measure the distance to the surface. So for example, I was trying to capture this cliff edge and I set the focal length to maximum option I had. It was 135 millimeters. And I was trying to capture it shooting from one space. After that, I moved the camera and repeated the capture. The bigger focal length we have, the bigger problem we've got to stabilize the camera. And there is a rule of thumb which tells us that the way that human can stabilize the camera is 1 per focal length. So when I set it to 135 millimeters, it means that I was able to stabilize the camera using my own hand with 1 per 135 seconds of exposure time. And this is the edge value. Image stabilization might help us to get 2 additional stops. And about aperture is another setting for the camera, which is very, very important. This is the gap in the camera, which helps us, which allows to get light into the sensor. So it works as a pupil for camera system and can be open and closed. And this is the experiment I made. I put a few Coke bottles and I set the camera. And I took 3 same images with different setting. So you can see with f set to 2.5, the center bottle is sharp, but the left one and the right one is very blurred. But the capture time was super awesome. But it cannot be used for photogrammetry because it's too blurred. The next one is f11. You can see it took 1.3 seconds, so it's impossible to stabilize with the hand. But all bottles are pretty sharp on this one. And the last one, there's a mistake, it should be f22. It's super sharp, but it took 10 seconds to take a picture. So it's freaking impossible to stabilize the camera, even with a tripod, it's pretty hard. And the less light we let to the sensor, the sharper image we get. And it means also longer exposure time. And this is exactly how human eye works, and I need your help again. So let's proceed with small experiment and make a small gap with your hands, something like this one. And you can take your glasses off and look through this gap and put it next to your eye to limit the amount of light which can access your eye, and try to read the text and try to make that gap super small. So it doesn't matter if you've got good or bad vision. The less light you put to your eye, the sharper image you can see. And even without glasses, you should be able to see the smallest one probably, hopefully.
I can see.
Wow. So the next value, so this is how aperture works. So the next value is ISO. I took the same image with different ISO settings, and this is how photogrammetry software really see the data. So each of those images is a pure black image with flash covered, but the first one is ISO 100. I increased the contrast to show what photogrammetry software see. So with ISO 6000, you can see there is a lot of noise, and with 16,000 it's even more. So shooting the same thing with that setting would mean that photogrammetry software will try to reconstruct fake data which doesn't exist in reality. The next thing, which is very useful, is histogram. And it's very useful when we are shooting images, because as I said, we are not shooting beautiful images, we are shooting data. So it means we should do everything to fill entire histogram range. And the best way to capture it is to have the biggest amount of data in the middle sections, in midtones. Everything which is on the bottom usually are represented, these are shadows, and everything to the right, these are highlights, speculars. When we are shooting raw file already, we are having 2 additional EV covers, so it means we shoot a bit more data, so we have more data to tweak later. If we have something to the left or to the right of this histogram, usually it's lost forever. So the setting the camera is balancing with those things. We need to lower the exposure time, so we have to shoot as fast as possible, but long enough to capture enough data. While we are capturing for photogrammetry, we have to do overlapping of images, and it's very helpful to define the path to follow. And this is the one I have found, because this is the less destructive I have found. This is the way I move the camera. And it helps me capture to keep organized. So I know that something was shot and I didn't miss anything. Also, we need to be sure that we don't destroy the surface we are capturing. So when you're shooting sand, snow, we need to move one way because everything what is behind is destroyed and we cannot shoot anything back. So this is how I would move my camera in here. While we are shooting, we need image overlapping, and they need to overlap at least in 50%. The more complex surface is, the more overlapping is needed. I have found that for grass, I need even 95% of overlapping. It means really a lot of images. The next part is about the workflow. So I'm going to present my workflow. The first part is a capture. So to capture something, we need to go to the location and find the spots where we want to capture, see the lighting, see how it is going to change. Maybe we need to pick something which is hidden in a shadow. We need to know that sun is moving so that something which is in shadow, it might not be in a shadow after 20 minutes. We need to change the surface consistency because it's always better to capture something which is easy to tile. And we need to be sure when we are walking around we are not destroying surfaces. So when we want to shoot a sand, it's easy to destroy surface we want to capture by accident. Next, I just set up my gear. So I set up the tripod and put the camera, put the ruler on the ground. I capture color checker as color reference. If needed, I use the light reflector. In this one, I set white balance to custom, focal length to 35 millimeters, aperture to 8. Usually I shoot everything with 8. And I set ISO to 100. In here, I'm shooting the gray card to set up the white balance. And also, I'm taking few additional shots with my mobile to see the location and get the context later. And this is how it looks like. As I said, it shouldn't face with the golden side. This is how I shoot the cliff surface. So I'm trying to follow the pattern you've seen. In here, I'm shooting the bubbles. I was using before tin foil from breakfast, so it brings always a lot of dogs to myself. But recently I moved to folded rulers and dogs are not interested anymore. Yeah, like in here, you can see those balls. These are breakfast foil tin. Yeah. Usually the capture takes me about 10 to 15 minutes. And when I capture all those images, usually about 100 to 200, I process them in photo editing software. As I said, I prefer Photolab because it's cheaper. I paid once and I've got it forever until the next version is released. And I'm using in post-production, we cannot tweak images. We just need to make sure they are consistent for reconstruction. So I use it to recalibrate the images and set the color white balance. I also tweak the color distribution across the histogram. So you can see to the left, because I took images and lighting conditions were changing, I was able to bring them into be more consistent using the software. And I fix the perspective deformations if there are any. The next step is reconstruction. So as I said, I'm using Metashape. So I simply import the images, I align them together, and I do the 3D reconstruction. So the image alignment builds the point cloud, so it's taking points from each image and try to find the same point on the other image. So that's why overlapping is so important. Shadows doesn't matter in here, it's just about having points which can be seen on different images, and using them, the photogrammetry software is building the 3D model and positioning the images. When this process is over, those images are being projected in form of dense cloud. So you can see this is the cloud of small points reconstructed from those images. And after it is over, it can be turned into 3D mesh. That zoom took me 5 minutes. It has 67 million polygons in this case. So high poly mesh generation. Usually I generate 67 million poly mesh because I use FBX file and vertex color, and FBX file doesn't hold color data if there's more than 67 million vertexes. FBX doesn't hold anything more because it is stored as integer and it's not float. So I also create another, I simply decimate it down, and I create other model for ZBrush to build Lowpoly Model. Or optionally, if I have full coverage, I can decimate it directly in Metashape and use as Lowpoly, and if it's simple surface. The next step is to create Lowpoly Model. I make it simply by creating plane for baking, and in ZBrush I'm trying to position that plane to align with the high poly model. So it takes like 10 seconds, and I UV map it in ZBrush usually. And when it's done, I'm using this plane for baking. And as I said, I'm baking in Substance Designer. So you can see I reconstructed the ruler, and also I messed a bit, so I lost the part to the right. It's my fault, it's my mistake. I wasted a lot of scan this way. Yeah, so I've got ruler and no data in here. But it's not a problem because I'm going to use AI later to tweak it. So this is the next part. In here I'm using AI to tile the texture. It's automatic software. It's super cool software in my opinion. It handles height map very well. So you can see in here the left side is totally broken and the right side also. So I just grabbed all baked maps together, composed them into material, and this is the AI node, that one which is called seam removal. And right now what I'm doing, I'm going to paint a mask to tell AI which areas should be ignored by the AI and replaced with something else. So I just grabbed that albedo map to preview where am I painting, and right now I'm painting the mask. So I'm just telling AI to put something else there because it's not good. As you can see, it took me a few seconds. Yeah, and it's done. And right now I'm going to execute the AI. AI is trying to reconstruct that. This process takes about, I don't know, 20 seconds. And it's done. So you can see there's no way you can see any transition. AI just made it perfectly on every material, on normal map, on height map, and this is the same process. And this is something super cool. I received it from Automatics guys. They're working on it currently. It hasn't been released yet. This is AI removing direct shadows from the capture surface. So again, you're just plugging one node, bam, and you've got no shadows and pure albedo map. Hopefully they will introduce that soon to the software. I haven't opportunity to test it yet. It's just video from them. They said it's not pure AI, it's a kind of hybrid because AI was too crazy and they have to limit it somehow. And user is going to have some control over this one. This is what they told me. I used to also remove things and tile textures using Substance Painter with simple offset option. To make it, I just created low poly plane to see the transition on the edges, and I use clone tool to tile them. But I always struggled with the height map after baking. And this is something that AI has no problem at all with, so it can, AI just make it. So these are examples of how I tile the texture manually using the clone tool. So this one, I think I was testing automatics and AI wasn't able to handle this one, so it has to be done manually by human so far. This one, it would be handled by automatics without any problems. But I made it manually in here. Same this one, I think AI would handle that. The last part of the process is tweaking the final data to turn it into PBR materials. So I'm just setting the albedo value. So as most of you know that we are the middle section of the middle value of albedo is not in the middle of the color range. It's higher and it's about 187, and it's something that has to be tweaked after in a substance. And it's because we are using gamma space, not linear space. So we are using linear space just for normal maps, ambient occlusion maps, not for color. It's because our screens are not able to represent the left part. So even in here, there's a gradient from left to the right, and we can't see any difference, which until 96 roughly. So everything looks the same. And I'm also removing shadows. I used to use ambient occlusion cancellation node, but I have found it's pretty glitchy, so I designed something recently which works better in my opinion. I'm using ambient occlusion mask to tell myself where the shadows are, and I'm using 2D transformation nodes to fake data which is missing. So it's a pretty easy process, but it works. And I think the photogrammetry, this is the summary, is really good technique while we are working with biomes. It saves a lot of time. It always gives us very consistent and high quality results. And this is technique which is very easy to follow. And these are scans I made. And even if it's limited to reality, we can use other tools and do whatever we want to. And I cut. And this is the last section, what's next, and the Q&A. So, as I mentioned before, the sky is the limit. This is why I suggest to find every way to improve the workflow and never be trapped with one technique and one workflow. Experiment with different type of equipment, because as I said, sky is the limit. And this is the gear designed by James Candy. This is, in my opinion, the top photogrammetry guy in the world. And he built this setup. He's using cross-polarisation, and he's scanning the trees with this one. And he said this rig is super useful also for the ground surfaces. And I don't agree with him because, for example, I can imagine to shoot a sand or grass with this one. We are affecting the surface. It doesn't matter that it casts the shadow. Yeah, so you cannot scan anything destructive with this one. And he knows that, and he agrees with that, and he's planning to build something super cool in the future, probably next year. So for example, you cannot use this rig to scan something like that because it's too high. Also, as you can see, there are small species in these cracks. So I would say that nothing is set in stone, and the sky is the limit, and there's always field for any improvements. So recently I bought a small drone. It's a toy, and I'm learning how to fly. This one can be coded, but it's still a toy, so I don't need any special papers. I can fly wherever I want to because it's too small. And I crashed this one many times, and because it's a toy, it survived. I lost a few propellers. I've got much more respect for drone flying right now. The problem while I was crashing, I was watching video telling that the good way to learn how to fly is to fly in the forest. I don't agree with that anymore. And the problem is not with tree, it's about branches. So every time I crashed on branch. Yeah, this is the first week without any crash so far. And this is what I'm thinking what's going to be next. So I need to probably experiment with drone a bit more, but it's freaking expensive. Guys from DICE are using Inspire 2, which is £3,000, so it's even more expensive. Or I want to experiment with Flash. It costs just 500. And so this is shot. I was experimenting with drone, the Mavic Air. My friend bought it, so he took a picture for myself. And this time I saved £800 because I didn't buy it. The quality was poor, but this is the Mavic 2 Pro image, so it's much more sharper. So it gives me the hope. And this is the Flash. I have to pick just one, drone or Flash so far. So this is Flash. My friend recorded this one for myself because he bought it already, and I'm really amazed with the results he gets because he's using cross-polarisation in here. And as you can see, there's sunlight and direct shadows. And this is, he has taken the picture with the flash in action, so you can see how it overrides the lighting. So this is the range of the flashlight. And this is an example, the shot without a flash, and another one with flash active. So you can see there's no shadows, even if there were shadows before. And the conclusion is that our industry is changing very fast, and to follow those changes, we also need to be open to change. So something like the best workflow tool, it doesn't exist. And we need to know all techniques and tools to pick the right for the job. And there will be always a lot to learn and a lot of research to be done. And because nothing is ever set in stone, the sky is the limit. And that's all. Sorry for blur. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions,